Kevin Feige, producer of Thor: The Dark World. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
How has the look of the Thor movies progressed from the first one?
Well, the first one was about defining the world of Asgard and defining a somewhat Norse-inspired fantasy movie, but really superhero Marvel film. So we went out of our way to not feel like things that have come before. We were never going to out Lord of the Rings, and that's not what Thor was in the comics. The Jack Kirby designed gleaming towers and angular structures are really what we wanted to do. In this film, we wanted to see more of Asgard, and we wanted to sort of go deeper and see how the people lived and see where other nooks and crannies of the world. And we also wanted to do it in a way that felt a little bit more real. So we've done that by shooting on locations, shooting helicopter shots of Norwegian landscapes, and then putting Asgard on top of it. And while much of the original photography goes away when you overlay Asgard, the camera moves stay the same, and the foreground clouds and the little imperfections in the helicopter movements, and all of that helps give it a much more real texture, which is what we were hoping to do. And one of the very first things we spoke with Alan Taylor about was helping us achieve that look.
You needed someone to sort of create that, grounding in this very fantastic fantasy world. Mm-hmm. How did you come to Alan Taylor as your choice of director?
Well, I started looking. I hadn't necessarily looked to television before to hire our directors, and frankly, I had seen the amazing work that David Yates, who had come from the television world, did on the Harry Potter films. And I also realized that television is going through a renaissance right now, which it absolutely is. And I looked at shows like Boardwalk Empire and Game of Thrones and Mad Men, and Alan's name kept popping up. Mm-hmm. And because of his work on Game of Thrones, I thought, well, maybe he'd be interested. Not a lot of similarity between Game of Thrones and Thor tonally, but enough of that fantasy element that I thought, well, maybe he'd be interested in this. Mm-hmm. And thankfully for us, when we spoke to him, he was, and has done a tremendous job bringing this to life.
Yeah, I think a huge part of the payoff for fans is seeing the relationship between Thor and Loki develop, go through its next phase. Just talk about the reward of seeing that play out on screen.
Well, I think it's one of the most unique relationships in cinema right now is Thor and Loki, and obviously setting up their mutual origins in the first Thor, seeing it all go awry in the Avengers, and The Dark World being one of those very unique movies that's a sequel to two other movies. It's a sequel, obviously, to the original Thor and to the Avengers. And seeing, how can the relationship between brothers survive after one brother just goes nuts, as he did in Avengers. And really seeing the deeper levels of Thor wanting to trust his brother, but frankly losing all hope that he'll be able to until he is forced into a circumstance in the Dark World where he has no choice but to try to trust him.
And you have a new villain who is kind of, Loki is sort of an ambiguous character in this one. Just talk about bringing in Christopher Eccleston as Malick Heath.
Yeah, we didn't want Loki to be the primary villain in this film. He had done that in Avengers. We wanted to explore different avenues for Loki, but we needed a big bad. We needed a bad guy that could drive the story. And we're huge fans of Walt Simonson's run on Thor, and he created this character Malick Heath in his run that we were very big fans of. And during the development of the first movie, briefly considered using him, but thought that his backstory was too rich and was too big that it would sort of compete with the origin we were telling in Thor. So we saved it for this one. But we loved having a villain whose backstory predates the universe itself, and who is very driven on total destruction for a reason, and to sort of bring back his own race and his own people, but at the same time doing it in a way that is absolutely sort of a freight train of destruction.
There's such a strong following for the Marvel films now, and people, when they go to watch a film that has that Marvel tag, they expect a certain tone, a certain humor. Right. Just talk about how much this fits into that.
Well, I hope The Dark World fits in, perfectly into what we're building and into what audiences expect of us. a lot of people come out of the film talking about the humor and the level of and the number of laughs in the film, which is obviously by design, and which is we think is an unbelievably important thing for our movies. For people to connect with the deeper emotional stuff, you want them to have both the release of the humor, and also I believe it sort of opens them up emotionally to accept the other parts of the story that we're telling. And it also fits in, as I said, it's a sequel to 2 other movies, but at the same time it hints at movies to come. So it's a fine line and a fine balance that we find ourselves in a very unique position to both make sure we deliver a movie beginning, middle, end that is standalone and absolutely satisfies what people want, while at the same time looking ahead to what's to come.
Yeah, I think Chris Hemsworth did a fantastic job. Of course, he's incredibly physically imposing.
Right.
He fills the screen magnificently. But I think there was quite a lot of nuance to his performance as well. Just talk about...
I totally agree. I mean, what Chris Hemsworth has been able to do beyond the physicality, and we cast him in the first film because of his acting ability and because the layers that he brought. He built the muscle. He has the physicality naturally. But what he does in this movie with the relationship with Jane Foster, the Natalie Portman character, with his interactions with Odin, his father, played by Anthony Hopkins, and in particular the dynamic between Loki, really shows off even more shades of the character and even more of an acting triumph, I think, for Chris.
Your visiting sets, there was there were sets in Iceland, there were sets in the UK, several different ones. But you wouldn't have seen anything really resembling what you see on screen in the final product. Just talk about your first screening and what you took away from it.
Well, we purposely went to many more locations on this movie because we wanted that backdrop of reality before we added all the visual effects onto it. And frankly, that made early screenings actually even better than they usually are, because sometimes you're just looking at a sea of green screens or blue screens. And this time we actually had the backdrop of Iceland. We had the backdrop of London. So while sometimes there were characters running around and reacting to things that weren't there yet, it already, it was worth it going to those locations, because we could tell even before the effects were laid on that we were onto something special here and giving it a unique look. Now that it's all finished, it's even better.
Yeah. You're taking the movie on tour. You've already done some of the world. You're continuing. You're in London now. Just talk about the early reactions you're getting from the fans.
Early reactions have been tremendous from the fans who have seen the film. We just came from South Korea, where I went to a mall with Tom Hiddleston, and he was met with 7,000 screaming fans. And that's very unique for a bad guy. For a villain to have screaming fans like that, made us realize, Hiddleston is onto something here, and that this character of Loki is crossing over in a way that we had always hoped, that we had partially intended, but to reach this level of sort of fever pitch has been unexpected and pretty amazing.